Today on Know Your Rights New Jersey, we will discuss how you work with a divorce attorney from the point where divorce is a consideration to the end of the process. We are pleased to have as our guest divorce attorney Lynda Hinkle, the author of Breaking Up, Finding and Working with a New Jersey Divorce Attorney. Welcome, Lynda.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Let's start with, when should one seek out a divorce attorney?
The moment that you think a divorce is possible. I would much rather meet with somebody early on, even if they're not ready to move forward, to have the discussion about the things they need to be preparing for. So they need to be putting records aside, particularly if you have a spouse that manages the funds so that you know what's available. You need to start gathering money and resources, and you need to start making a plan, especially if you have children, in regard to how to handle that going forward.
Is there something we should look for in particular in an attorney when we start?
That's such a personal choice, and I think it's very important for you to find an attorney that suits your personality. And attorneys also need to work with clients that work with their personality. So a reason I offer free consults is because I feel it's like dating. You know, you want to have a relationship with this person where you're going to be together for quite a while, possibly up to a year for a divorce. And you want to make sure you can work together and that you have goals that can work with one another. If I have someone who comes in and asks me, how do I hide all my assets from my wife? That's not my client. But somebody comes in and they're reasonable, they want to negotiate, they want to think about these things clearly, and they're not interested in revenge. That's my client, and I want to be there for them.
Okay, before we get into greater detail on the relationship between the client and the attorney, tell us a little bit about the grounds for divorce.
So there are many grounds for divorce in New Jersey, and up until a few years ago, you had to, for there to be no fault, you had to have an 18-month separation. No longer true. We now have irreconcilable differences. All you have to do is say, for 6 months, we haven't gotten along. Most people, even if they're going to stay married, can say that. And judges don't really want to know any more detail than that. Unless there's something specific to the claim that affects the equitable distribution, they just want to know there's a reason that they can sign off that this divorce is appropriate. So I always advise people to go with that route instead of proving adultery or going into mental cruelty or those sorts of issues where they're really going to drag some things out into public record that may or may not be beneficial to them.
So given what you just said, is there anything called a simple divorce?
There is a simple divorce. The simplest divorce is when the parties agree. They just come together and they have a discussion, or their lawyers have a discussion, and they have assets and children, and they come to an understanding of how they want to handle things. If they can do that prior to filing, they can be divorced in 30 days or 45 days, depending on the docket list in the court that you're in. It's pretty quick, it's pretty simple. You come to an agreement, it's done. That's the simplest divorce. It doesn't happen all the time.
But is that something sometimes people can do themselves?
They can do it themselves, although I always strongly suggest that at least have an attorney draw up the papers. Even if you're going to file for divorce yourself, spend the money on that, because there's things you may not have thought of that you'll be back visiting me a year or 2 years from now, fighting that out in emotion because you didn't think of it to put it in the agreement and you thought you understood each other, but you didn't.
Now, are there common law marriages in New Jersey?
There are no common law marriages in New Jersey, so if you are cohabitating, you need to make sure your paperwork is solid, because if you don't, you are going to be bounced between landlord-tenant court and civil court and family court trying to find somebody to give you relief if you want to remove one of the parties out of the house. You can't distribute income or anything like that.
But there are new laws for LGBT couples and families, aren't there?
Absolutely. Well, now we can have marriage, so that's infinitely better than what we had in the past, where things were a complicated series of contracts and civil relationships. However, some people are still living under that, and also some people choose not to get married, straight or LGBT, because of whatever personal reason, and that's when you need to put contracts in place to make things clear.
In cases like LGBT or cases involving child support. Should we be looking for attorneys with specific skills, specific knowledge, specific experience, or will any divorce attorney do?
Absolutely. I think it is a really good idea to ask the question going in, maybe even before you set up the consult, is this something you're comfortable with? Because you, again, have a personal relationship with this attorney. If you're walking into an environment where there might be judgment, or you might feel as though your situation is being treated differently than someone else's because of a bias, that's a real concern, and you want to alleviate that. A lot of attorneys will put out on their website that they're very clearly, more open to those sorts of things, and I think it's important to find that sort of relationship. One area I do a lot of work in is domestic violence, and people who have been victims of domestic violence have a certain mindset that some attorneys don't understand. And when they're negotiating, even if there's not a restraining order in place, but they're going through a divorce and there's a history of domestic violence in the relationship, there's a mindset that attorneys need to work with, and they need to really step in and stand between the parties and help to the negotiation to happen, because there's an equity of the ability to negotiate in that relationship.
Okay, so you mentioned questions. When a prospective client, or me, when I go into, I'm sorry.
Your wife is going to
no, that is not happening. I'm just using myself as an example here. So, when
your wife comes to me.
That's better. Yes. When my wife comes to you, yes. You suggest that she should be asking questions of the attorney.
Right.
What are the top questions that she should ask?
There's lots of questions to ask, but I think some of the most important things to ask are, what will you do if I don't agree with what your assessment of the case is? I think that's one of the most important questions, because some attorneys are a little bit of a bully, and they will push clients into settlements that they don't want. I will never do that to a client. If we really can never come to an agreement, I may suggest actually that they see another attorney and get a second opinion, because sometimes people are being unreasonable. They're emotional. They need to really have some clarity.
Well, you have some other questions that I wanted to get your elaboration on. And one of your questions is, what would you do if you gave me advice and I just could not follow it?
Right, and that's what I think, if you can't follow it, what am I going to do about it? Well, it depends on the situation. So if I say, well, I think it's probably a good idea for you to take this settlement, and you say, well, I just can't. Okay, if there's a reason you can't, and we can find some other way of getting you to where you need to be, no problem. Then we work it out. We figure something else out. Sometimes people just aren't willing to negotiate on certain points. That's okay. They have a right to make that position.
You suggest that she should ask, what is your philosophy on negotiation?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, negotiation can make all the difference in the cost of a divorce litigation. So if your lawyer is unwilling to negotiate right up to the point of trial, your divorce is going to cost a lot more, because trial is much more expensive than picking up the phone and calling the other attorney and saying, can we work this out?
Okay, so she wants to know, what do you consider a successful divorce?
What I consider a successful divorce is when a client comes into me with a list of the top things that they need taken care of, and they get them. The top things. They're not going to get everything they want, because family court is not about making anybody happy. If anybody walks out completely happy, that's an unusual day in family court, because what people want is often greater than what the law will provide.
So then I want to know, are you available? Can I reach you?
Yes.
Can I reach you by email? Can I call?
Absolutely. I have heard many complaints of people expressing that they can't get a hold of their attorney no matter what. It is important that they can call. It's important that there's a point person in the office that they can call as well. So attorneys go to court. They do. And sometimes they're not available. Judges do not appreciate you taking out your phone and having a call with a client in the middle of a hearing. So sometimes you may need to speak with someone, and that attorney won't be available. Is there someone in the office you have a good relationship with that you can call when you have something important, and they can get a message to the attorney, or they can assist you with a procedural question?
Okay, so a biggie is about cost. What should I ask about cost, and what should I expect?
Right. So there is no way of predicting the cost of a litigation from the outset, because a lot of it has to do with what the other side is going to do. It is important to consider return on investment. If you have $10,000 worth of assets, don't put $10,000 into a divorce unless you're talking about a serious custody matter, in which case it's worth putting money in to protect children if that's necessary. However, it is also important to consider what your long-term strategy is for the divorce. So if you have an initial retainer and your lawyer expects you to replenish that as soon as it runs out, that needs to be a conversation you're going to have. If your lawyer is willing to work with you on payments when your retainer runs out, that's a conversation you need to have. And you need to know, really sort of have a view of what your long-term financial situation is going to be. If you think you're going to need money from the other side because most of the assets are held by them, you can do something called a Pendant Alita motion, where you can ask for some counsel fees to be shifted. And if the appropriate amounts of money are there and the court sees that you have the need, they may do that.
Well, Lynda, we are going to take a break right there, and we're going to come back and talk about a little bit more about cost and contracts and the dreaded CIS information form. We'll take a little break, 30 seconds, and we'll see you then. We're back with Lynda Hinkle discussing how to hire a divorce attorney. And you mentioned before break the words contract and retainer.
Yes.
First of all, tell us a little bit about what is a retainer?
Okay, a
and how does that
retainer
work?
is the amount of money that you're going to put forward in the beginning of divorce. So family court lawyers especially, we work by our hours. We sell time. So whatever their hourly rate is, will be reduced from the amount of time that they work from your retainer, and also their staff, which usually have different rates. So that's what the retainer is. There should be an engagement of services letter or retainer agreement in place. It is required by New Jersey that family court matters have these. So if someone's not offering you one, you need to leave, because that's a problem. And it is also important that should list how you're going to replenish if you run out of money, and how often you're going to be given information about your bill.
Contract. How important is a contract?
Hugely important. It moves the whole relationship along. And, I think that's what Rousseau is, the social contract. A contract is everything in life. It's so important to be clear about what everybody's rights and responsibilities are, including in your relationship with your attorney.
So we're not talking about an oral contract.
Absolutely not.
And
Put in writing.
And what kind of things generally should we expect in the written contract?
Scope of the work that we're working on your divorce, or if there's a particular motion that we're working on, those sorts of things. Who's going to be working on your matter, if there are associates in the firm that may be working on it or not. What the rights and responsibilities are of the client and of the attorney. There's actually a form we have to put in there under state law. And there's also matters such as what happens when your file closes. What is it going to cost for you to get that back? What are the other costs? What do they charge for copying? What do they charge for travel? All of those sorts of issues.
Okay, talk to us a little bit about another important form of communication, billing.
Yes.
What should we expect with billing?
So there is no rule, hard and fast rule, about how often lawyers are supposed to bill. It's supposed to be reasonable. So reasonable for some people is every 6 months. Reasonable for some people is every 30 days or so. I do every 30 days. I do once a month billing for all active clients. But if you haven't been getting a bill, if your retainer agreement says you're supposed to be getting a bill in a certain time frame, follow up with your attorney or with their office, because it is concerning when you don't know where you stand on those issues.
Before my wife goes to her first meeting with her divorce attorney, what kind of documentation should she have?
Well, the first meeting is very sort of elementary, but if there's been a divorce filing, they should bring all court paperwork, any history of court paperwork, if there's been any motions between you've been separated, any agreements that you may have already had, financial documents. It'd be helpful if you have tax returns for a couple of years. If you can't get that readily, then don't feel like you can't go. Just bring what you have, pay stubs, any information about assets, any information about debts.
what should a prospective client expect in that first meeting?
So in the first meeting, I'm asking some general questions about what the finances are, whether you have an agreement related to any children already, or what you would like to see happen with that situation, whether you've had the conversation already, or is this a complete surprise to the other party, and what you think or know they're going to do as a result, what led to it. And sometimes, quite honestly, I will see somebody's not entirely ready, and I may suggest, have you seen a counselor? Have you tried to work this out? If you're not ready for this, that's the first person to see. You know, it's good that you get the information from me, but go see the counselor and give it a try, because you never want to have regrets.
Talk to me a little bit about the dreaded case information statement.
So it is a giant, horrifying form that sends my clients reeling more often than not, because it just asks for everything financial, and both sides are supposed to do it. In fact, you're required to do it within 20 days of doing the divorce complaint, or technically your complaint can be dismissed, although sometimes judges don't notice. So it's really important in terms of what you're looking at when it comes to alimony, especially. Child support is a guideline, but alimony issues are often dependent, particularly temporary alimony in the course of the divorce, on your expenditures and your need. So you want to be very clear on that. I will have people come in and sit down with my staff and work on that if they choose, but sometimes they choose to do it on their own because they're pretty organized and they don't want to spend the money, which is absolutely fine by me, whichever works for them.
What if I find that many people really don't know their expenditures? How do you handle that?
Right. So, you have to really kind of guess at some of them, but you also can go through your bank statements and say, oh, I spent this much in the last few months at PSE&G, or I spent this much in the last few months on at the Acme. So I know now I spend that much on groceries.
What kind of mistakes should individuals avoid when dealing with the divorce attorney?
So huge mistake with dealing with a divorce attorney is not trusting your gut. If you feel that this is not the person for you, but your friend said they're great, it doesn't matter what your friend thinks, or your cousin thinks, or your aunt and your uncle. Everybody on the street will tell you everything that happened in their divorce from their side, and it may not contain all the information you need. This is your life. Make the decisions that work for you.
Give us a little vignette, if you can, of some of the worst experiences between divorce attorneys and their clients.
Okay, so the worst experience with divorce attorneys is, and this happens pretty rarely to me, as I screen fairly well, but every once in a while you realize, uh-oh, I'm on the wrong side. My client is completely unreasonable and is not going to agree to anything, even if a court would clearly give them this. Like, I'm not going to split the retirement asset, even though every court in the world is going to split the retirement asset from the length of the marriage. And they just simply won't agree, but they also don't want to pay you to keep negotiating for the thing you'll never get. Those are difficult clients. On the other side, I know I have had many clients come in and complain about divorce attorneys that they have had, and we're now in post-judgment dealing with some of the things where they felt bullied or pressured into making an agreement that they weren't comfortable with, or they didn't understand, or there are clauses in it that they let go out of laziness or whatever have you, and I look at these clauses and think, why on earth was that ever allowed? I would never have allowed a client to sign that.
So when you find yourself in a situation that you're feeling bullied, you're not getting what you want, but you're still in the relationship, what should you do?
Well, you can go see another attorney, get another opinion. And sometimes somebody will come to me and they already have another attorney. I'm not going to steal or poach somebody else's client. But if they come to me and they say, these are the things I'm worried about, I will make suggestions of how to go back to that attorney and have the conversation. If the attorney refuses to have the conversation, then come back to me and we'll talk about doing a substitution.
Are there any special things that a client should be aware of if they're dealing with taxes?
Yeah, be very careful, because the IRS does not care about your divorce decree. They will still come after you even if you have indemnified yourself in the agreement. So you can say, well, it's all his debt, all you want, but the IRS still thinks it's yours. So you want to be very, very clear about how you lay these things out and how you deal with the IRS in that matter. So deal with them directly. Don't just assume that because you've negotiated with your spouse, you're fine. Make sure you've also communicated this to the IRS. There's a thing called an innocent spouse. If they've done something that you didn't know about or that was against your interest in a business or something like that, make sure it's very clear with the IRS where your position is and that they are in agreement with it.
So would you recommend that you also have an accountant working with closely with your attorney in those
Yes.
instances?
If you don't have any problems with the IRS, okay, no problem. You can figure out how to divide up the year that because you can still file together in the year that you're still married but separated. Whether that's beneficial or not may require an accountant to make the call. But if you have no real issues with the IRS, then you don't necessarily have to see an accountant. But if you have any issues, you need to see an accountant or a specialist in that area.
One more big issue that I want to hit: pensions. What should a client be aware of when dealing with that issue?
Okay, so pensions are typically divided based on marital coverture. So that means from the date that you were married to the date of separation or the date of the complaint, which is an arguable date depending on the situation, you are entitled to 50% of that person's pension and they are entitled to 50% of yours for that period. Not for anything that happened before, not for anything that happened after. That can sometimes be waived if there are other assets that are being moved instead or just by agreement.
Okay, so if my wife can't afford an attorney, what should she do?
Well, unfortunately, with all the budget cuts that we've had, there are not that many pro bono resources for family matters. Even domestic violence, sadly, there's very little resource available. However, I think that it would be wise to read my book, which has some explanation of the process, to go on the judiciary website and pull whatever forms you can and whatever information you can. Judges sometimes will expect people who are representing themselves to still know the procedures. And, some judges are much more lenient with pro se or self-represented litigants. Others are not. So make sure you know the procedures, because otherwise if you go in and he has an attorney or she has an attorney and you don't, and you're not following the procedures, that judge can penalize you for that.
So Lynda, share with us before we part the name of your book again and where we can find it and if you have a website.
Okay, it is called Breaking Up, Finding and Working with a New Jersey Divorce Attorney. It is on Amazon, both Kindle and the print version. And we are at lyndahinkle.com, which is LYNDAHINKLE.com.
And so there you have it. Thank you very much, Lynda.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us. Don't get divorced. See you next time.